Can you hear me okay? Am I switched on? Yes, I can hear myself. So Qt Lottie, life-changing experience. Let me introduce you to a new Qt technology which came out earlier this year. Is anyone familiar with Lottie or Qt Lottie at all? After Effects, one person? Nice. Um, it's kind of fun for me that Qt Lottie is an animated icon framework, and we're in the biggest room for one of the smallest things. But enough, a little bit about myself. So I've been working for a Qt company in the professional services since 2011. And as you can see, during that time, I've done various different things, quite a lot of different things, all Qt related, until February 2018, when I was in the California office, and they assigned me to a very large UI project. I'm still working on it nearly 2 years later, which means it's actually the second longest job I've had after the Qt company. And I'm working with a user experience team, directly with the user experience team who make these power sports devices and power sports machines. And they have a very complicated, very dynamic user interface. It does a whole lot of things. So naturally, when I heard about Lottie, I was like, this is exactly what we need. Captivated by it at first. What we needed was, or what was needed, was an animated icon framework. So an animated icon, as the name suggested, is basically a little icon, and when you click on it, it does something. So in this case, we've got Gmail and various other ones. We're clicking on them, and they're reacting in a way which is captivating and interesting. So a little bit about Lottie itself, and we'll define the terms as we go along. So Lottie itself was created by Airbnb Engineering. They're based in San Francisco, and they were doing the same as I was. They were spending a long time recreating these complex designs which the design team had come up with. And a lot of their designs were coming as Adobe After Effects animations. And I think no one's used Adobe After Effects yet, but they were having these designs sent to them from their design team. And then they were re-implementing them in code so that they did things across various platforms. So in 2017, Airbnb announced they'd been working on this Lottie framework, which is named after Lotte Reininger, who's a movie maker from Berlin. She does shadow movies. It came out then. And the idea behind Lottie was that it would allow software engineers to just kind of directly embed the After Effects animations into the application without re-implementing them. So it's a fairly small thing, but it saves an enormous amount of time. You don't need to re-implement it. You don't need to change things. You don't need to tweak things. Fantastic framework. So obviously, I was working on this kind of stuff when it was announced as a technical preview in 2018, I think, 2019. I volunteered to maintain it. We were in need of a maintainer. Of course, I didn't write it myself. I'm just the maintainer. But I do think this is a pretty useful technology. Okay. So if you're not familiar with After Effects, it's a video editing and video design tool. So if you see these videos on YouTube where they've got slow motion and captions and all sorts, very often created with Adobe After Effects. It's available from their Creative Cloud, and it's the industry standard. It's used everywhere, except for the really big companies. They use that. The particular part of Airbnb, of Adobe After Effects, which we're interested in, is this little bit at the bottom, the shapes, masks, animations, and color fills. It's also used to create these icons, which you then create a shape, you create various masks and translations, and do all sorts of crazy things, as we'll see. Of course, Lottie doesn't run, the Lottie plugin doesn't run the After Effects animations directly. They're actually passed through a plugin called Body Moving plugin, which actually creates JSON files from the After Effects animation. So it reads the After Effects animations and exports it as a JSON file, kind of similar to SVG, not exactly the same, all in JSON. So After Effects doesn't create it. It's done by the Body Moving plugin, which was released in February 2015. So since February 2015, there's been several body moving players have been released. Lottie is one of them. Lottie, however, is significant amongst the body moving JSON players. It's actually the biggest one. It's everywhere by now. It runs on Android, it runs on iOS, and it runs with a React.js runtime for websites. If you have a mobile phone, you probably have somewhere on there is a Lottie animation, most likely. It's on Twitter, it's on, of course, Airbnb use it themselves. If you're familiar with Telegram or Redshift, it's actually difficult to say exactly where it runs because it's available as an open source project, and keeping numbers are kind of difficult. And it's very good. It does what it needs to do very, very well. But the three different platforms all run ever so slightly differently. So the features used in the iOS from the After Effects animation won't necessarily run the same on Android. Doesn't support anything other than iOS, Android, and React. And so, yeah, you have different features. You need slightly different animations for each platform, and you only get the three platforms. So you can't run it on an embedded Linux device if you needed to. You can't run on Windows. You can't run on Mac. The only way to do that would be to use Qt Web Engine, which for an animated icon is not really what you need. It's too heavy. So working with one of our customers was creating a smart TV and wanted to use these kind of animated icons themselves. So we worked with them, created a Qt-based version of Lottie. It's written in pretty much pure and clean Qt, which runs exactly the same animation on every platform where Qt will run, which is pretty neat. And this was released early 2019. It may even have been February, so I'm not entirely clear on that exact date. Okay, but that's when it came out. It's been around since early this year. QtLottie itself is a fairly simple application. It runs in three ways. First of all, we parse the body moving files. So the body moving files already come as JSON files. So parsing them into a JSON tree is pretty simple. Just in case you run this in a dedicated thread, so it's not taking up the GUI. We then add a rendering framework on top of this, which reads the properties and sets the properties for each frame. So it calculates where the properties need to be for each frame. It will set the trimming and the paint pass while it's doing it. And then we cache that. So each of the descriptions of how each framework should be is then cached elsewhere. We then draw each frame using the QPainter API into a bitmap. These bitmaps themselves are not cached. So as you run a Lottie animation, you're constantly drawing with the painter, but we're not recalculating the properties. Okay, and then that goes straight to a QML integration layer. So of course, if you're familiar with QML, the Lottie animation class is basically a QML item. It's actually a subclass of a QtQuick painted item. So that does the painting itself. And the API for it is much the same as any other QML item. Okay, so one of the common questions I get is, why are we using QPainter? Why do we not use a scene graph node? And the reason for that is QPainter is a lot simpler and easier to implement. It would have taken a lot longer and cost a lot more to implement them all as scene graph nodes. We did try, it didn't go well. But in terms of performance, we found the QPainter is more than enough for an animated icon framework. It runs what it needs to run without any particular problems. Does very well. Okay. Additional issue, or one other bonus of using QPainter, is that if we wanted to add widget support, we could just fairly simply add the QWidget support, which we couldn't do if we were using a scene graph node. So it should be fairly easy to use. Okay, so when you're working with Qt Lottie, if you need to embed these icons in your animations, how does it go? It's pretty easy. Qt Lottie elements are not terribly complicated. It's kind of very similar to an image. So let's take a look at some of the code we've got for this. Okay. So I've been having problems with my Qt creator. It's been crashing all day, and I think it's nervous. Sorry? Is that Tuka? Tuka Turunen came. Nice. Okay, so here's a very simple animation. It's comprised of Lottie elements. These are all Lottie icon animations. If we look in here, we've basically got a simple model. We're reading from a home directory using a string list behind the scenes. And the Lottie animations themselves are all here. And that's really all you need to do. In this case, I set the autoplay to false, so they're not moving. But if we click on it, you should see it will run. If you double click, it should pop up into its own little screen, and you can see little simple, my apologies, little simple animation running on the display. And that's the basics of using Qt Lottie. Okay. Okay, Qt Creator just quit. Okay, so writing for Qt Lottie is where things get a bit harder. A good question, which if you're looking at using Qt Lottie animations in your application, is how do you create the actual JSON files for the animations themselves? We could take a look at that. I think probably good thing to do. I will warn, After Effects is actually quite hard to use. If you're not familiar with After Effects, it's quite a steep learning curve. The ones which I'm showing in this demo mostly came from the website lottiefiles.com. Of course, you can always hire someone, but let's take a look at how to actually get your Lottie file from your After Effects animation to a JSON file. So After Effects, if you're not familiar with it, it's not dissimilar to our Qt Design Studio in that we have various shapes and we have a timeline, and we then just run the timeline, and various elements will then do various things. So at the time when I wrote this, I was in America, and it seemed like a good idea to do American flags, but maybe not. But this is a nice, simple little animation, which we have ready-made. And to then get that out, we go to the windows in the Adobe After Effects extensions. If you've just set up your After Effects and just installed it, you would need to go to Find Extensions on Exchange, but I already have it installed. So we go to Extensions and we open the Body Moving plugin. Okay, so this is not documented on the Lottie site yet, so take note. When you open the Body Moving plugin, you choose a place to save your file. In this case, it's going to the desktop. Give the file name here. In this case, we just called it US. And then you'll need to open up the settings directly. So if you look down here, you'll see there's various different settings. Most of these don't make a great deal of difference. One thing which we'll look at later is the assets. You can pass the assets into the actual application, or you can have them as separate files. If you're using it over a network, I would recommend you use the include in JSON option. But for now, that's not particularly important. The only really important thing is to export the old JSON format. This used to be called legacy, but since body movement has changed, if we run it without that, then it's not going to work in Qt Lottie. If we select that, then QtLottie will have no problem running the application itself. We then click Save and then click Render, and it will render our application to the desktop. Qt Creator died. Okay, give that a second to come up. So it's all dead. I've lost my Qt plugins. Okay, not good. Okay, so if I run this application, I think it's probably not going to run because I've lost my Qt settings. I only have sim iOS. Okay, strange. Okay. Technical problems, do apologize. So that's the basic Lottie, how you create the Lottie animations. You use After Effects and you run it through the body moving plugin. Okay, so once you've done that, you would then need to embed it in your application itself. And what do you need to do next? Of course, assuming you've got your JSON plugin, you've rendered it down to JSON. Let's take a look at the code for Qt Lottie animations, or try to. Okay. Okay, I'm going to configure this as an iOS project because that's, I think, the only way to get it to actually appear. So I've created this little demonstration of a button here. Okay, we're there. Okay, we're good. take a quick look at this Lottie animation button here. I'll take a look at the API first, though, so you get an idea of what we're planning to do with it. So here we have, too soon. Here we have a Lottie button. So what I've done to create this, now this is not part of the Lottie API itself. This is something I've created. When we've got a clearer idea of what you need in a Lottie button, we'll most likely add something to the Lottie API. In this case, so we just give it a width, height and width, and height and a width, which we're getting from the parent. So you'll see I've got the scale property set on this. The reason I'm using the scale property is because these animations are not my own. They're actually, some of them are different sizes and don't fit where we need them to, but you can scale them quite nicely because it's a QPainter bitmap. We've given it a property to hide it when it's not running. So if it's not running, you don't see anything. And then we're giving it an animation finished signal. If you go back to our Lottie button code, you'll see we also have, in the Lottie button itself, we've given it two signals. One is clicked. So if you click it with the mouse, it will give you this signal. And we gave it also an animation finished signal. So when the animation itself has finished running, it will run. And you'll see that's here connected here to the Lottie animation, which has the signal on finish. So you know when it's finished playing. You can do various other fairly straightforward, fairly simple things with that. Okay, so this is the demo. I can't run it directly from Qt Creator, but this is a simple demo, application, email application, which you might, for example, use it for. So in this case, the first email, I'm just going to delete that, and you'll see there we have the button runs, sends the relevant signals. Likewise, this one we send, we click this, and again, it animates the icon, and we have another icon here to show when it's run, and that's all there is to it, really. It's fairly simple to use. Okay, good time. Okay, so that's the process of creating buttons with Lottie. So, of course, QtLottie is still in technical preview at the moment. It should be coming out that fairly soon, but there's a number of things which we do want to add. At the moment, it's a very simple SVG, is the minimum we needed to get it working. We're going to add text strings. So we're going to add char strings. They're in the body moving specification, but we don't support them yet. We're going to do that soon. We're going to add fonts, of course. If you're having text, you probably want to have your own fonts too. And we're also adding images. And so the patch is in code review. We're working on that. We'll have images soon. And that's principally added because I find it very hard to make these animations, and it will make it a lot easier for making very simple, very quick animations using images. We're not going to support all of the body moving features because there are a lot and not all of them are necessary. If you look in the source code, we have a list of what's not supported. Okay. If you're feeling inspired to have a look at QtLottie already, you can get hold of the QtLottie. You can download it straight from the maintenance tool. If you check the Protect Previews checkbox, it will appear, and it's just a regular icon. It's not an animated one. The checkmark will appear. You can also take a look at the source code for the QtLottie. It's on GitHub. And Lottie demo apps are or will be available shortly on this location, also on GitHub. Okay, so coming to the end of the presentation, but just quickly, what will change in your life? I promised you QtLottie will change your life, and what will change? If you're, one of the questions I hear, one of the stranger questions is, are we trying to replace our engineers with graphics designers? We're not. It's just for animated icons. If you work with design teams and you've heard them asking for a few tweaks and it's getting close to release, you'll never have to do that again. You'll never have that as a problem. You won't need to implement complex micro animations again. Of course, it's not a good time for, not a good use of developer time. It gives you more time to do the real serious coding. And you may also end up learning After Effects and have a whole new career working in the animations world, who knows. Okay, yeah, absolutely captivating icons will be available too. Okay, any questions on QtLottie? I see a few people. This guy here's at the front. Was that? No, okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
No, pleasure.
Yes, what I did in the past was creating animated GIFs and then using a Q movie and a Q label. And this together enabled me just to have an animated GIF inside my Qt
Yeah.
application. So yes, what's the question? Can you differentiate what are the benefits of using the one or
Lottie
the
versus
other
GIF.
solution? Okay, you
The difference Lottie versus GIF, I don't know if there's actually that much of a huge difference between Lottie and the GIF file. The key point really is that Lottie is created by the animators and they like to push it in the Adobe tools. So where are you getting your GIF files from? Sorry, the microphone's gone. Yeah, from somewhere. Yeah, the key point is really the source. You could just use a GIF file as well. Lottie animation is, I think, it's more properties based. So you parse it, it reads the properties, and you describe the description, whereas a GIF is a series of frames. So the key difference there is really where the source is coming from, where the data is coming from. In theory, because we have a JSON tree with various properties, you could dynamically change the properties at runtime. I think that might be out of the body moving spec, but that's one advantage you would get using Lottie versus GIFs. Otherwise, it's where you get your data from. Yes, it scales quite nicely. If we go back to that animation I had earlier, system I had earlier, in the Lottie grid view, I lost it. Oh, it's there. So in this case, we're using scaling a lot. We're setting the scaling automatically. When we open it in the delegate again, we're again changing the scaling, and you'll see that the quality of the result is actually quite nice. So that's true. Yeah. Any more questions there?
yes here.
Yes.
Thank you. Could you please show how big the resulting JSON file was for the demo that you just exported?
Sure. Good question. Can, but first I have to remember where I sent it to, and I think it's on the desktop. So here we have the JSON file. Open that. I think it's coming. It's in. Actually, I'll also open this one in Xcode. Like I said, image support is coming. So this demo here is actually using a couple of Qt images to make that simple effect.
No, what I meant,
Yeah.
how big the JSON? Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, here's the JSON file itself. So the JSON file itself is 57 kilobytes, direct from.
That's quite big.
Too big?
And my question, the actual question was, does it make sense to convert these files into binary format to improve loading times?
Does it make sense? Let's do it here. Qt Lottie was requested, and I think for the use case, it does make sense. If you look at the size of that as say a GIF file, we'd have to compare it to that really, but yeah. Anyone else?
So next question from the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, so like in your defense,
Thank you very
57
much.
kilos for like a scalable animated file, that's like PNG style alpha channel. That's not really a lot. That's like a really small file actually.
Yeah.
Compared in like bitmap animation, it will be hundreds and hundreds, probably megabytes. So yeah, this is like really smaller than you would expect. My question is from like a designer's point of view, would it be possible to channel pretty much like, can I apply different properties to the Lottie file through the Qt or QML interfaces. So basically, like repaint the icon, for example.
To change the properties when it's running, so you've got a blue icon. And
yeah. For example, like highlights or like active icon, without needing to actually re-render it in After Effects or something.
That is something we would like to do, and we have discussed, but we're not entirely sure. But if there's a demand for it, then that's something that we could do. In theory, because it's using JSON and you can just set the properties from the code, it's possible. We don't have it at the moment, but
yeah, it would be superb, because like for system-wide support in operating systems, for example, when we have like theme-based colors, we can like recolor animated like solid alpha channel icons. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're not the first person to ask for it, so it's something we're thinking about.
I have a similar question, like going the kind of this direction, but maybe less demanding. Like, what controls do we have? Like, is there a time scale, or like the overall like play pause possibilities, like of the Lottie file? So do I know how long it is? Can I stop it at a certain time, then continue playing it? Like, what playbacks are available?
Do you mean what the Lottie API itself is? Are you asking? I'm not quite sure I follow.
How does it behave? It behaves as an animation, right? So animation has a certain time, right?
Kind of. It does. You can send a Lottie animation directly to a particular point in the file, and you can go to a point and play it from a certain point. So in the sense, you could create a single file, and you could have various timelines in the After Effects, and then you could run it to a certain point, which is a nice feature as well. We look in this one. So if I give you an example, not this one, this is not a good application. So if we take this one here, we can do this kind of thing. We can run it backwards, we can run it forwards, we can change the speed it runs at. There's various different things you can do with it. You can move it backwards and so on and so forth.
Can I also control it that from Qt?
Yes, this is controlled from the Qt source code. So it's not open right now. Yeah, but the Qt API would allow you to control that. So when I say it's kind of like an image, it does a lot more. You can actually access the animation itself and move it around. We have the loops here, speed, and so on and so forth.
One comment related to the question about the color change. So if you are the author of the original files, then obviously you can then easily change. And that was one of the features that was when who was originally requesting it was to have a day mode and night mode in their system, and so that they can just flip a property and everything changes, all the colors change. But that was like the idea was that you wouldn't manually tweak that. Okay, I changed this color to that color, because you had already designed the asset so that it contains those modes, and you were just flipping the mode switch to achieve the color change.
I would like to know, for example, you are stating a Lottie is better because you can actually take animation from a designer and not recreate it manually, for example, in QML. But are there any performance compromises that we need to do? Did you ever do some comparison of animation in Lottie versus something created in QML?
Yeah, I would say I'm a believer in using the right tool for the right situation. So for the case of an animated icon, creating it directly with Lottie, I think performance-wise is pretty good. If you need a super fast animated icon, then that's an interesting use case, which I'm not terribly familiar with. We do have, of course, full-size dynamic displays as well, and you wouldn't do a whole user interface using Lottie. It's really just for the animated icons. So in terms of performance, if you're doing something particularly large and particularly complex, then QML or Qt Design Studio is a better tool to use for that. We don't have any performance comparisons which we've done, so we haven't looked at actually comparing the speed they would go at.
For all the guys who are still using widgets, will there ever be a QtLottie widget or something like that?
Again, because we're using QPainter, we think it would be a fairly simple job to do Qt widgets. But of course, Lottie is still a new technology. It's still in technical preview. If there's a demand for widgets, then we would be happy to do that, I think, Turka. Yeah.
Anyone else? No?
No?
Yes, one.
Uh-huh.
Thanks. I wanted to know if the frame rate is does it belong to the frame rate of the whole Qt environment, or is it independent of it?
It's independent. So frame rate is really the speed at which it will run back. So it kind of controls the speed at which the Lottie animation will itself run. It's separate from the frame rate of the entire application. So if we had this running at 15 frames per second, you'll see the animation is a lot slower. It's kind of jerky because it's doing only 15 frames per second. If we change that up to 30, then it's a little bit quicker. But this doesn't affect the frame rate of the entire application. It's really the speed at which it's playing back.
No more questions?
No more questions?
No more questions.
Ah, super.
Then a big applause for Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope that changed your life.